Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mindful Leader Practices podcast. Today, we have the honor of hosting Scott Shute, a key figure in mindfulness and conscious business space. Scott was one of the first to be VP of Mindfulness and Compassion Practices in the corporate world at LinkedIn. And now he runs his own organization called changingwork.org. Scott's mission is to revolutionize work cultures from within, fostering environments that prioritize compassion, collaboration, and conscious practices. It's with great honor I welcome Scott Schultz to our show today. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And my first question you probably are asked by many people, or probably on most of your shows, is
Mm.
how did your mindfulness journey unfold for you to become a VP of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn, and now the founder of changingwork.org? So,
Sure,
what's led you to here?
sure. Pretty great. Pretty great. I'm fortunate. So there's a part of me that has had a career in customer facing roles and customer operations roles, customer service. And that culminated after almost 30 years at LinkedIn. I was the VP of Global Customer Operations, which is all of the customer facing stuff that wasn't pure sales over time. And during the really rapid growth of LinkedIn, when I started, my team was maybe 200 people, and LinkedIn was 1,500 people. And 6 years later, my team was over 1,000 people, and LinkedIn was, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 people. So an amazing high growth environment. So there's that part of me. There's this other part of me where I've had a meditation or a contemplation practice since I was 13. I've been teaching classes since I was in college. I studied for over 20 years to become a member of the clergy. And it's something that I never talked about or even thought about talking about at work until I got to LinkedIn. And it was such an open, amazing place that I thought, well, maybe I can bring more of me. And so I decided to lead a single meditation on a Thursday afternoon at 4:30. And that first time there was one person there. And the next time, the next time there were three, and then there were five, and then it grew and grew. And myself and about a whole bunch of volunteers, 100 volunteers, we all created a mindfulness program together. And I eventually turned that into a full-time job. I convinced the CEO who I was reporting to that I was an operations guy. He was out in the world talking about compassion. And I said, well, I can operationalize compassion and mainstream mindfulness. And so that is how I got the role. And I did that for 3 years before going out on my own to chart my own course.
That is so phenomenal. And you said something, you said I could finally do something that was me.
Mm,
I could finally do something that was me. And
mm.
tell me more.
Well, of
That,
course, all of it was me. But
yeah,
one funny thing, well, interesting thing, is when I got the role, people would say, "Oh, when did you become this person? Like, when did you start becoming interested in mindfulness?" And I said, "Well, this is always who I've been.
yeah.
It's just now I get to express it."
Mm,
And
mm.
maybe that's what I mean. It's like, of course, all my jobs got to use certain parts of me, but this was the job that got to use the deepest, most important part to me.
Or the whole of you.
The whole of me,
Yeah,
including all those years as a leader.
yeah,
Because if I had just tried to become a meditation teacher at 21, nobody would have listened to me in the same way that people will listen to me now
yeah,
after having
yeah.
the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, no, that explains it.
Mm,
So for LinkedIn, what shifted for them when they embraced mindfulness and compassion at that level? Because it
mm.
was making a statement, right? There is a VP of mindfulness and compassion practices. It actually made waves outside LinkedIn, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I would say is I'm not going to say that I changed LinkedIn, but what I can say is that the LinkedIn culture already existed in this really amazing way. And my role helped accelerate that. My role
Mm,
helped bring it to the forefront and really codify some of the things we were doing. Um, and so what it did, it's really interesting. I would see people in the hallway and they would come up to me and shake my hand and say, "Oh, thank you for the programs you're offering." And I would look at them as if, I'd never seen this person before. And pardon me, they would say something like, "Oh yeah, I've actually never been to one of your things, but I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're doing it. It makes me so proud to work at a company that offers these things."
So they
So,
were not using it.
well, not all of them, but in this case, some of them just the afterglow, because the company was investing in it, it made them really proud to be at a place like that. And then,
Mm,
of course, lots of people actually did take part, but
yeah,
I thought it was
yeah.
funny.
Yeah, but even for the ones who didn't use it, it felt good to be a part of the company
That's right.
which was making statement around that we care about this,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
This,
And all of this was really accelerated by the fact that our CEO at the time, Jeff Weiner, was talking about his own mindfulness practice, at the time
mm,
using Headspace.
mm,
And then he was talking about compassion as a powerful business practice.
mm,
And because he was talking about it, that created this umbrella of safety. Of course, for me to have the role, but for all of us to operate in a way that those things were at the roots of what we were doing.
mm, mm, mm. There is definitely, I think you were a trendsetter in a way that definitely more acceptance of
Mm,
mindfulness in the corporate world.
mm,
I remember, so I do team coaching, and I remember one of my team coaching client once telling me not to use the word mindfulness in the team coaching engagement ever.
mm.
And now I have team coaching engagements where they introduce me with those credentials that I am also a mindfulness teacher. So I see
Mm,
that shifted. Mm, but I
yes.
just wonder, is that shift enough? And I wanted to ask you on where are organizations at today? What's
Ah.
still plaguing them? What are some of the challenges our workforce having? So I think shifting gears to yes, this got
Sure.
started and there was more acceptance, but how far have we come?
It's a great question. And look, we're never at the finish line, right?
Yeah.
When we think about self-awareness, we think about our own development. There's never a finish line. It's just grades of goodness or grades of what I would call consciousness.
Mm,
So, is it good? Of course. Yeah, it's good. Is there room to go? Yeah, of course. So, what I would say is where a little bit of history, the first program I'm aware of
mm,
would be Google and Chengming 10 and the work that eventually became Search Inside Yourself, which then spun out to be a different company, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And when I first got really serious about creating a program, I was still in my operations role. I did an internet search on mindfulness at work, and I found Google and SAP and Aetna and eBay and Intel and others. And I eventually reached out to each one of these leaders to say, what are you doing? And can we learn from you? And in that moment, what I found was, so the truth is, we were just as far along as anybody else. It was all pretty nascent. It was all pretty early. And I created this group of us, and we've been getting together now for 6 or 8 years, the Mindful Workplace Alliance. And what I would say is that the names have changed, the programs have changed. Almost all of the programs have come and gone with the leaders or the individuals who are with them. SAP is the one I would hold up as still kind of the shining star of the current situation. But what I would say is that more and more companies have something. They
mm,
may or may not have a VP of mindfulness or a head of mindfulness, but they have something. Mindfulness has become part of their wellness experience.
mm.
And maybe for some of them, it's a check in the box. Maybe. Maybe some of them are going deeper. But to your point, it's a lot more accepted now than it was 10 years ago. And so I think a lot of companies are trying to figure out, where does this belong? How
Mm,
much do we invest in this? Where do
mm,
we put it? And what do we offer? I
mm.
think those are first valid questions, but at least they're questions that are being asked, where 15 years ago they were not being asked at all.
Yeah, it wasn't. And so, in fact, as you are saying this, I'm like, is there a common understanding of what mindfulness is? And so we are seeing a variety of a range, as you explained, that some of them
Mhm.
might have it as a checkbox, some of them have it in wellness programs, some have it. So there is some degree of awareness. Um, but is it again a buzzword for them, or do they have a true understanding of what mindfulness is?
I think like everything else, there's a varied range,
Hmm.
right? You have people who are practitioners who very well know what it means and they're trying to build bridges and offer things. And then you have people who to them they have no idea, they have no experience, and maybe they feel like they should offer something, but since they don't have any experience with it, they're not exactly sure what to do. And so just like everything else, it's going to be a
Hmm.
huge range.
Hmm.
One kind of interesting thing I came across, there's a reporter who wrote a book called Mindfulness in
Hmm.
about 2019. And uh, full transparency, I didn't read it in depth, but I read enough. And he was talking about, oh, well, and he was actually kind of calling out the people who were doing this work because it wasn't as pure as the original, let's say meditation practices of the Buddha or things like that. And that companies were just offering these types of things so that they could get more out of their employees. And I thought that that was a very cynical view of what this is. As an example, do you not want companies to offer this? So
Hmm.
the way I think about it is there's this complete range of, let's call it consciousness or understanding from 0 to 100. And instead of just focusing on the top 1%, I want to focus on all 100 and move all 100 as far possible as we can. And
Hmm.
so if that means they move from having zero understanding of mindfulness to having a little understanding of mindfulness, great. Or if they move from having a little understanding of mindfulness to having a lot, great. It's all good because it all creates positive momentum for the
Hmm.
company and for all of those individuals.
Hmm. Everyone can get better. You're saying everyone can get better. I think that's a good question to get into your aspiration and the work you are doing with the changingwork.org. Wouldn't it be
Mm.
great for us to see where your
Yeah,
mind's at,
sure.
where your heart is at,
Sure. I'd love to
where
share.
you
I
are.
I left LinkedIn 2.5 years ago. I had written a book which is called The Full Body Yes, and I was out in the world doing speaking engagements and coaching and consulting. And my mission is still the same. It's to change work from the inside out. And I pretty quickly realized like, oh, if I really want to make a dent in things, it will take way more than me. And so we had this idea that we could create a movement and just start gathering our friends. And so we started with really our friends, people who are coaches and authors and consultants trying to do the work of conscious business. And in this phase one, just trying to help them be more successful, amplify their messaging, give them a community to belong to. So that's where we're at in phase one. And after about 6 months, we have about 600 people in our community. Phase two is to then build things as the collective that we can then offer to enterprise. We can offer to leaders, we can offer to individuals, and eventually create community for three, we call it the three-legged stool. One is the practitioners, two is leaders, and three is individuals. Because everybody needs, some flavor of this work. And so one of the projects I'm most excited about is we're going to write a book together, you know,
Mm.
to to push forward our collective and individual understanding of what it means to be a conscious leader. The first book is around self-awareness, and the beautiful part is we have 25 authors, each will write one chapter. Here are 25 new stories to tell,
Mm.
25 different perspectives on what it means to be a conscious leader. And the idea is that none of us are the end all authority of anything. But
Mm.
what I know is that you are the worldwide expert in being you, and I am the worldwide expert in being me. And when we tell our stories and we share our understanding, then we're moving things forward. And so this is the general idea with changingwork.org is that how do we move together forward?
Mm. Love it. It's about everyone recognizing that they are the worldwide authority on themselves,
Mm,
right? And then
that's right.
bringing the essence of that and sharing that with the world and, so that they can become the worldwide authority on themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that most of the information that we have has always been with us. I'll
Mm.
give you an example. I really like James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It's
Mm.
genius. I quote it all the time. And one of my favorite quotes, which is basically half of the learning of the book, I'll paraphrase, but he says, "Our lives do not rise to the level of our goals, they fall to the level of our systems," which is genius. I love it. Well, it turns out he wasn't the first one to say it. Archilochus said it 2,500 years ago. And
Mm.
I'll bet that if we go back to Archilochus, he learned it from somebody else. An old scroll somewhere from someone decades or centuries or millennia ahead of him. My point is, all of this information is already there. But
Mm.
what's new, and look, this is to take nothing away from James Clear. What he did was he made it real for us in our consciousness, in our world today. Just
Indeed.
like Archilochus made it alive in his world 2,500 years ago. So, this is what each one of us can do through the stories that we tell, through our own experiences, and we can make it alive for people around us and have that wisdom grow collectively.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's a great book. I also quote it a lot, and it's changed lives of many. Yeah. S-
Hmm.
So, I was curious to hear some stories from you.
Mm,
If you can bring some anecdotes, stories where mindfulness shifted a leader in a positive way, and what happened as a result of that. And so, I think it'll be good for our leaders to hear
sure,
how do they internalize it, and how does it become real when people start
sure.
practicing it?
Well, interesting. People would often ask, what's the ROI on this type of work?
Yeah.
And I don't mind the question, but I think it's we haven't quite internalized that we don't need to ask the question.
Yeah.
So, as an example, most people know that physical exercise is good for us,
Yeah.
right? To the point where most big companies, if they have a lot of people at a spot, will offer a gym at work. And they just know it's just, of course, we offer a gym because we know that when people are physically healthy, everything goes better.
Mm.
They miss work less, our healthcare costs are less, they're happier, they're more creative, etc. And so, did anybody ask the person who runs the gym what the ROI of the latest rowing machine that we bought was?
No, 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 no.
Probably not. Or other things that are good for employees. Like,
Yeah.
did we do the ROI on what's the analysis of turning the air conditioning down from 80 to 72?
Mm.
Right? Did
Mm.
somebody do the ROI on that? No, because we
No.
know that it's good. It's good for people.
Yeah.
And in the same way, mental exercise, mindfulness is in the same place. So if I ask those same leaders who are asking me about ROI and we're talking about the gym, I would say, all right, well, how many of your employees do you need to run a 6-minute mile for their job?
Mm.
Or
Mm.
or
Mm.
how many of your employees do you need to bench press twice their weight?
Mm.
Or
Mm.
to be able to do a 3-hour long spin class, at a
Mm.
certain heart rate? Of course, not very many. But how many of your employees, what percentage of your employees would you like to be emotionally stable? What percentage of your employees do you want to be mentally
All of
sharp?
them,
Yeah,
mentally
all of them.
stable, emotionally stable,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So, in my opinion, we should be spending, look, I'm a fan of physical exercise, and we should be spending 10 times, 100 times on mental exercise compared to physical exercise. So, then you ask about stories. I had a young woman reach out because I like the stories better than the hard data.
Mm.
I had a
Mm.
woman reach out during COVID time, and she reached out to just say thank you for the programs that we were offering. And we got to chat a little bit. And she said, because of these programs, I'm screaming at my kids a lot less.
Mm. Mm.
And we both laughed, but it was that kind of laughed where you're kidding, but not kidding.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
I've been there too. And she had a lot going on. She was a young mother, had two little kids at home. This was when daycares were all closed, so she still had to be the primary caregiver. She was a salesperson, so she still had a big number to make at work. She was a partner and the one taking care of the house and all of that sort of thing, still doing the groceries and all of it. And she went on to say, look, because of these practices, yes, I'm screaming at my kids a lot less. I'm a better mom.
Mm,
I'm a better partner. I'm better at work. I'm just a better version of myself.
mm, mm.
And I thought that's it. That's why we do this work.
Yeah.
What's the price that we want to put on that? If you multiply that across every employee who participates,
Mm,
what's that worth?
mm.
Well, I think it's worth a lot.
A lot. That's worth a lot. In fact, as you are saying this, our Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, he says that we have in US, there is an epidemic of loneliness.
Yes.
And that's the leading cause of anxiety and
Yeah.
depression and mental health
Yeah.
issues. And there is even more isolation at work than it used to be.
Yes.
And I mean, one question which comes up is, why are people suffering so much? How come we
Mm.
ended up in this state of
Mm.
this kind of epidemic in our country?
Good question. I think a lot of it is structural. So if you, I was thinking about this the other day. Do you remember the day? Can you remember when the smartphone happened? I remember. I don't remember what year it was, but I remember the exact moment. Maybe it's 2006 or 7 or 8. I was with my friend, a really close friend of mine, and we went to a hockey game. And at the intermission, he pulls out this black device and he starts looking at it and really intently. He's not talking to me.
Mm,
And I was annoyed with him because I was thinking, like, what are you doing? This is so rude. Like, what are you doing? So I asked him and he said, oh, I just got this thing at work. It's called a BlackBerry and it has all
mm,
my email on it. And so he's like, I'm really sorry, but I'm like so addicted to it. And that, at least for me, was one of the moments in time where we accelerated this disconnection from each other, right? Because these devices are
mm,
so powerful, and so useful, we become truly addicted to them to the point where we're losing track of each other, right? Have you ever been in a conversation and as soon as there's a lull in the conversation, I'll speak for myself. As soon as there is a lull in the conversation, I'm reaching into my pocket for my phone, right? Well, in the old days, we would sit with that uncomfortable silence for a little bit. Maybe we would ask another question. We would get curious about each other because we didn't really have any other choices. We were forced to socialize. So the devices, and now, being at home with Zoom and the hybrid or work from home environment is not helping. It just creates more and more and more of the same.
mm,
And so it really takes an effort on our part to counteract that with true connection,
mm,
to really feel responsible for our own connections. It's not just going to happen. What's going to happen is all this structural stuff. We're going to spend more time on our phone and more time with TV and more time where
mm,
instead we could be really connecting with each other.
mm.
And that's true at work as well. It's true at work as well.
Because taking responsibility for, our own connection. Scott, talk about it in the remote setting where, our remote work creates this, it's almost like separation. It's so easy for me to create that separation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
That's right.
you're, not even 3D.
Right.
Right. So, so how does this make it even more challenging in remote? And what are some of your strategies you suggest?
Sure.
How do people
Sure.
increase that connection?
Well, I think it goes back to starting with intention and owning our own responsibility for it. That it's not going to magic its way into a solution. Or if we're waiting for our manager or we're waiting for our workplace to, quote, fix it or make it better for us, that's also not the right idea. We own it. We own our ability to connect with other people. So, what does that mean? It could mean a quick check-in with, your team on whatever. It could be Slack or WhatsApp or text or email or whatever it is. Just a quick note that says, "Hey, I'm thinking about you." And not about work, but sharing, like today with my friends, I was sharing pictures of the eclipse.
Mm,
Or, one of our friends shares pictures of his cat,
mm,
and then there's all these cat pictures going back and forth.
mm,
And on the surface, you think, well, what are we doing here? Like,
mm,
we're not getting work done. But
mm,
on the other hand, when we were all in the same place, we would sit around the office before our meeting would start, Or we just push our chair back and have conversations with each other. Or we'd see each other in the hallway when we stop and talk. And nobody ever said, "Oh, you spent 45 seconds, talking to that person. You really need to get back to your desk and get at it." But somehow it's become more black and white when we're, at home and on Zoom. So making it a priority for each one of us, taking ownership for it, and then doing it.
Mhm.
It's not
Mhm.
complicated. You just have to do it.
And that small talk is okay. At
Yeah,
the beginning of a meeting, small talk is okay.
that's right. It's actually vital.
Mm,
If we don't create, so the number one factor in creating a high performing team, Google did this study, Project Aristotle, 8 or 10 years ago. I don't know what they were looking for, but what they found was really fascinating. The number one factor in a high performing team is psychological safety. In other words, can I be myself? Do I feel at home? Do I feel safe? Because if I don't, any one of those, I'm not going to be very creative. I'm going to do the minimum. I'm going to be guarded. But when we feel safe to speak up. We feel safe to bring wild ideas or the next ideas. We feel safe to be creative. We feel
mm,
safe to provide feedback to each other. And all of those lead to better business results. So this whole small talk thing is not just, oh yeah, whatever, we have to do it. No, it's to create connection. And if you ever feel like we're just having to do it, we're doing it wrong, right? It
mm.
should be natural and fun and engaging and energizing.
We talked about photography, and I see
Hmm.
beautiful photographs behind you. And
Thank you.
you are a photographer. You also play violin. Uh,
Guitar,
oh,
guitar.
guitar. Yeah,
Yeah.
not yeah, guitar right there. And you're an artist in all these fields. And I
Mm,
have been wondering that what's the connection of this with mindfulness, or if there is, the creativity is connected with mindfulness. And I
mm.
have a reason. We'll go there in a little bit, but I wanted to see if there
I th
is.
I think, well, maybe if we expand beyond mindfulness and talk about self-awareness
Hmm.
or becoming, well, yeah, self-awareness. Are we really aware of all the parts of ourselves?
Hmm.
And do we give those parts space?
Hmm.
I grew up in a very musical family. I have a love of photography and art and nature. I love to be out in the quiet nature, taking photos and hiking and mountain biking and doing all the things. And so I always wanted to lean into that, to really express that part of me. Now, for me, what I would say about that is I feel closest to, I'll say, my true self
Hmm.
when I'm out in nature, when I'm quiet, sometimes when I'm playing music. Now, Dr. Keltner, one of my friends who's a professor at Berkeley, he talks about awe, wrote a book on awe and the 8 pathways to awe.
Hmm.
So, Docker's a scientist, so he talks about awe. I'm not a scientist, but I'll talk about the divine because
Hmm.
that's how I interpret it.
Hmm.
So, being out in nature for me is one of those pathways to being closer to the divine.
Hmm.
Expressing myself fully, whether it's at work or with music or whatever it is through art, is another way of expressing that deepest part of me, the divine part of me. So to me, that's what it means. And if we tie it back to mindfulness, mindfulness is a practice that slows everything down,
Hmm.
that allows us to be aware,
Hmm.
aware of all of it and without judgment. And when we slow down, we're able to then cultivate that deepest part of ourselves and let that flourish.
Mhm. Mhm. It's a means to that of
Mm,
being that high level of awareness.
mm,
You get to the deep within, so that you can then manifest all your talents and you connect with them.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Um, Innovation. So one of the other challenges organizations are facing today
Mm,
is innovation,
mm,
where they're not innovating fast enough. There is huge pressure on them to constantly innovate. They're maximizing their individuals' potentials. They're hiring
mm,
the best talent,
mm,
and yet it's become like a revolving door. People come
mm,
in, people leave, more people come in, leave,
mm.
but then they constantly struggling for innovation.
Mm.
And I wonder what's your take on that?
Sure,
What are your thoughts around that?
sure. Pardon
Bless.
me. Par- oh, excuse me. I've been dealing with a cough and a sneeze there. Thinking about innovation, I think that it's really critical to provide an environment where it can flourish. Because as humans, we're really Homo sapiens, right? We're animals. And our first response, our first reaction to everything in life is that of an animal.
Mhm.
So it's to defend ourselves, or it's to survive, or it's to gather resources, or to find a mate. All of these things are really deeply programmed in us. So if we think about animals, going back to psychological safety, when we feel safe, we can then let down our guard. So you think about two dogs that meet each other at the park. In the beginning, if they're unsure about each other, they'll lower their head, they'll growl, they'll show their teeth to each other. And they're not playing, right? They're not doing anything fun. They're just in survival mode. But once, you'll see one of the dogs kind of lift its head and expose its neck or expose its underbelly to the other one. It's a sign of deference. It's a sign of vulnerability that says, hey, I'm no harm to you. You don't have to worry about me. And then pretty soon they're running around and wrestling and rolling and doing what dogs do. Well, in a simple way, this is what happens to us at work. If we're constantly worried about getting laid off, if we're constantly worried about getting screamed at, if we're constantly worried about what our teammate or our boss or our peer group member is going to say to us because we have history of them being whatever, then we're not going to have that innovation. We're not going to have creativity. I don't think you fear your way into innovation. And if we create an environment where people feel safe, where they feel heard, where they feel like they can do their best work, where they feel loyalty to their manager and to the company, where they feel a sense of purpose to the work that they're doing, they can connect the dots between what they do and how that organization makes a difference in the world. Yeah, then people are lit up. They'll do anything.
Hmm.
They'll do anything because it's meaningful to them. But if they're just in survival mode, no way. Not going to happen.
It goes back to self-awareness.
Mm. It goes
Everything
back to
somehow,
self-awareness.
somewhere connects. Do you?
Yeah. It's self-awareness and it's the organization creating a place where we can do our best.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not complicated. There are a few, I'll give you an example of several practices. Oftentimes, well, my first job, I started at a company where we all had colored badges based on how long we had been at the company.
Hmm.
So my badge was red. And if you'd been there for 10 years, your badge turned yellow. And 15 or 20, it was then gold.
Hmm.
And the message was pretty clear. Like, we're going to listen to the gold badgers,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
One of the most powerful things we can do as a leader when there's a discussion, opening the conversation, ask the most junior person in the room to speak first.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's something super simple. It's not complicated. But what we're doing is we're saying, as a leader, we're saying, hey, look, I want to hear from everybody. And I'm going to start there. Because if I say what's important to me first, it shuts down everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now they already feels like, oh, well, that's decision's already been made, or this is what he already thinks about it. So that's one. Another one is, as leaders, we're familiar with performance review cycle. You know, we have to write 8 or 10 or 20 of them, every 6 months or every year. For every one that we write, we should also ask that employee to write one for us.
Hmm.
It's like, I want to be a good leader. Could you please tell me, it doesn't have to be long, but just give me a few points on what's going well and what I could do better at. This is incredibly powerful because what it says is, I'm not so arrogant to think that I know everything. I'm not so powerful that I'm too good to ask, right? I'm playing a role in this company just like you're playing a role, and I may be higher up, but we're both valuable. And I
Hmm.
see the value that you provide, and I want to learn from you. This these things create connection and they create safety in a way that definitely spurs innovation.
I love that. I love the idea of employees writing it. Is anyone doing this? Is your organization promoting it? Is it in practice? I'd love to know more.
I think it happens at the individual level. I used to ask for it myself as a leader,
Mm.
and maybe there was times when I didn't, maybe there was times when I did, but I that's the best practice for sure.
Mm. How do you envision the future of work?
Hmm. Envision the future of work. Well, for sure it's going to change. I started working in 1993, and so I had an engineering degree. So I was in the middle of high tech. I was working for a semiconductor company. But this was 1993. The World Wide Web, we were just starting to hear about things. And it didn't come to being until really 1995. So really started before the internet. And the internet changed things drastically, right? Just like the mobile phone, the smartphone has changed things drastically. And now we're on the precipice of AI. It's already here for a lot of people in certain ways, um, but it will change work drastically. So the question is, how will we change along with it?
Mm.
And that's the unknown. I think that we as a people will use AI at the level of our consciousness. So
Mm.
some people will use it for bad, some people use it for good, just like everything else. It's always been that way.
Mm.
But the
Mm.
power perhaps is a little more concentrated. The power is a little more available to everyone out there.
Mm.
So I think that the people who will be very successful are the ones who can, first of all, learn to work alongside AI.
Mm.
I don't think that another person's going to take my job, but somebody who does what I do that knows how to use AI, they're going to take my job.
Mm. Mm.
And over time, the things that we'll value in our employees will be the things that AI is not as good at.
Mm.
The
Mm.
human connections,
Mm.
right? The innovation in ways that are uniquely human.
Mm.
And that completely remains to be seen of what that will look like.
Mm.
Um, and I think that, the challenges will continue to increase. Our, the challenges of division, the challenges of, the haves and have nots, those will continue to grow. And so it's up to each one of us to really think about, what do we want? What's the future of work that we want to create? And take some responsibility for it. Not to say, oh, I'm just like a leaf on the river and work is going to change and I can't do anything about it. I just don't believe that's true.
Mm.
Each one of us is every day manifesting our own work,
Mm. Mm.
maybe at different levels based on our level of seniority or level of creativity, but we're each creating that.
Mm.
So
Let's
work will
dub.
be as amazing as we want it to be.
I love this. I'd love to double click on this. Each one of us is manifesting our own work. Let's
Yes.
double click on it and
Sure.
expand it a little bit more.
Sure.
How? You know,
Sure. So the broad perspective is that Fridays are great.
mm,
And what are Mondays? Mondays are terrible,
mm,
right?
mm,
Why? Well, probably because for hundreds of thousands of years, work has not been a pleasurable experience for people doing it. We had, in the old days, we had kings and slaves or landowners and indentured servants. None of that was fun for the workers. They were not talking about fulfillment, they were just talking about survival. But today, in this world, in the digital age, when, employees are by far the biggest asset, the biggest resource that companies have, employees have more say in the type of environment that they get to live and work in. So we have more say over what happens, but we also have more agency over ourselves.
mm,
You know, if I take the attitude that Mondays are terrible and Fridays are great, then that's what my life will be like. But if I take the attitude that, my life, it's just life.
mm,
Monday and through Friday, I do a certain set of things, and Saturday and Sunday, I do another set. And I can be just as fulfilled. I can use my creative powers just as much. I'll give you an example. So I talk a lot about purpose in our work. And, the truth is, I found more purpose in the work the higher I went because I had more responsibility. I could see clearly, the connection that I could make between my group and the results of the company, or my group and the results we had on our customers. But I was talking to my friend, we'll call her Susie, it's not her real name. And my friend does customer service, kind of like technical support for a company that builds systems that goes in bigger systems, that goes in bigger systems, that goes in things that somebody would use.
It's hard to see the connection.
It's hard. It's hard to see the connection. But when I talked to her about purpose, she said, well, my job, I talk to 30, 40, 50 people every day, either on the phone or by chat or by email. And my goal is that for each of those people that I interact with, I want my interaction with them to be the best thing that happened that day.
Mm, mm,
So nobody came to her and said, hey, Susie, how can you have more meaning in your job?
mm,
Or let's talk about the company values and what your work is doing. She put it on her own back to say, no, it's my life. I'm creating it and I'm going to create something awesome. I'm going
mm,
to create something amazing. I'm going to create something that fills me.
mm,
And I think each of us has a part of that,
mm.
maybe a lot of it that we can do, regardless of our role.
To connect to that, right?
Hmm.
Whatever work you do, find a connection to that deeper purpose.
That's right.
Mm. It's more fulfilling, and we have more agency over
That's right.
that.
That's right.
So, what is it you can suggest to um, leaders who want to initiate mindfulness and compassion programs within their organization?
Hmm. Good question. First, every organization is different, so find out a little more about what your organization needs. So, the interesting thing is there are probably tons of people who would
Hmm.
love to be part of it if you only gave them a platform.
Hmm.
So, one of the things I found is that at LinkedIn in this moment, in about 2013 or 2014, I discovered in a variety of ways that there were other people interested in mindfulness.
Hmm.
Someone from learning and development was creating a video and wanted to talk about the power of mindfulness. I thought, okay, cool, I'm not the only one.
Hmm.
And so once we started getting out there, we said, hey, we're going to create a program. Who's interested? We literally had over 100 people say, I'm interested and I want to volunteer to help. So it doesn't have to cost a lot. There are probably already people who would volunteer their own personal time to help. Second is you can find a third party. There are some really great people who do this work. It's what they do. I like our friends at Wisdom Labs. They have an app called Wise at Work, and they can help get started. They have community programs, they have an app, they make it easy. Insight Timer also does this. Headspace also does this. Um, and Silly, Search Inside Yourself. They teach a mindfulness course and do train the trainer inside of organizations. So find, one of these organizations to partner with. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, and they can help you scale up really quickly. And then a third thing is it needs a sponsor,
Hmm.
right? If you just offer something and make it part of your wellness group and nobody ever talks about it, then nothing ever happens, right? If you yourself as a leader look through your list of benefits, I'll bet you're surprised. I'll bet you find something like, oh, I didn't even know we did that. And that's where mindfulness ends up if you don't support it. It will be the thing that, oh, yeah, we offer it, but oh, yeah, nobody uses it. Well, nobody uses it because nobody's telling
No.
people about it. It needs a champion to stand on stage every once in a while and go, hey, here's why this is important for me. Here's why this is important for us. We care about you as employees. That's why we're doing this, is we want you to be happier and more fulfilled. That's why we're offering it. We want you to be at your best. Having that champion makes it fit and people will take it up.
So these are some great pointers. And with you, we have just started this conversation and our time's coming to an end. So I'm wondering, how can people continue this conversation? There's so much work that's happening with your organization. How do they connect with you? How do they take this
Sure.
to the next level?
Good question. If you want to join this movement of changing work, come to us at changingwork.org. We have a special coupon code for you to have an extra month of free access. The code is podcast 24, the number 24. So that's a great place. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. If you're interested in having me be a speaker or do some workshops or that sort of thing, you can find me at scottshute.com. And I'm at scott@scottshute.com. So I'm all over the place. You'll have no trouble finding me.
That's lovely. And I would be putting all these links in the description of the podcast. So this will be available at a click for for the folks.
Beautiful.
My final question is there a call for action for folks
Mm,
who are listening? Is something you'd want to
yes.
say to them?
Take responsibility for your own happiness. I think happiness is an inside job. And yes, we're surrounded by a world that seems mad sometimes, but we can find the peace in the storm. And it's when we choose to. When we say, no, 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 I'm going to be example of the peace from the storm. I'm going to choose to feel joy, even in the face of all this challenge. And when we own it, we become the masters of our own lives.
Mhm. Mm. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. Taking responsibility for our own happiness is the invitation for everyone. And it's just such a great pleasure to have you here, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me.